Welcome back to Sovereign Moves. Today, we're diving deep into the latest global strategies. Remember to like and subscribe for more insights.
All right, let's get into it. In the spring of 2026, something huge happened in the world of global finance, but it was so quiet you might have missed it. We're going to unpack this incredible story of how a major U.S. ally, India, used Chinese money to buy sanctioned Iranian oil, and you better believe we'll dig into what that means for the future of the almighty dollar. I mean, just think about that for a second. India, a partner of the U.S., paying for sanctioned Iranian oil with Chinese money? It sounds kind of crazy, doesn't it? You've got these three huge geopolitical players, India, Iran, and China, all tangled up in a series of deals that could totally rewrite how the world trades its most important commodity, oil. Okay, so to really get how this all happened, here's our game plan. We'll look at the perfect storm that basically forced India's hand. Then we'll talk about this tiny 30-day window that opened up. After that, the really wild part, the Chinese yuan solution they came up with. We'll also cover a tale of two waivers from the US. And finally, what this all means for the dollar's new reality. Let's jump in. So let's set the scene. It's early 2026, and India is in some serious trouble. We're talking about a massive energy crisis. And what kicked it all off? A whole lot of geopolitical conflict brewing in West Asia, which, as you can imagine, had a huge immediate knock-on effect for global supply lines. We're talking about the Strait of Hormuz. You gotta understand, this place is basically the jugular vein of the global energy market. Something like 20% of all the world's oil passes through this tiny choke point every single day. So what happens when it suddenly shuts down? Well, for a country like India that's incredibly thirsty for energy, the consequences were, to put it mildly, catastrophic. And wow, just look at these numbers. This really shows you how bad things got. Oil prices shot past $110 a barrel, which is enough to just strangle an economy. Crude imports down almost 25%. But look at that last bar, it's a 90% drop in LPG imports. And that's not just an economic stat, that's a huge social crisis. We're talking about millions of people in cities, especially the poor, who suddenly couldn't get the fuel they need just to cook dinner. It was devastating. Okay, so with the whole global market basically about to fall off a cliff, the United States does something pretty unexpected. And let's be super clear here. The goal wasn't to do Iran any favors, not at all. It was all about preventing a total meltdown in the global energy markets and trying to get those crazy high prices back under control. So what did they do? They issued something called General License U. Now, the really important thing to get here is that this was just an emergency relief valve. It wasn't a change in U.S. policy towards Iran, not by a long shot. It was a one-time only 30-day deal. The whole idea was to let about 140 million barrels of Iranian oil, which were just sitting there, stuck on tankers at sea, get sold off. This gave countries that were desperate for energy a very, very small window to buy. But here's the plot twist. Even with this new waiver, this General License U, opening a legal door for India to buy Iranian oil, there was another huge problem. How do you pay for it? The old ways of doing business, they were totally broken. Okay. And this table really shows you the genius, or maybe the desperation, of the solution. So the old way, before 2019, was this weird system where India paid in rupees. But that created what they called a rupee trap. Iran ended up with piles of Indian currency that they couldn't really spend anywhere else. By 2026, that was totally off the table. So what was the new way? This is where it gets wild. They decided to bypass the rupee and the US dollar completely. They used the Shanghai branch of an Indian bank, ICICI, to pay for everything in Chinese yuan. This move was brilliant because it kept the whole transaction outside of the US financial system, which meant they could dodge the threat of those crippling secondary sanctions.
So you can bet India didn't wait around. They saw this tiny window of opportunity and they jumped on it. Both the state-run company, Indian Oil Corp, and the private giant, Reliance, moved fast. The big one was IOC's deal, 2 million barrels on this tanker called the Jaya. And get this, it was the first time in 7 years that India had bought any oil from Iran. This was a huge deal, and it was born purely out of necessity.
Now, you gotta understand how weird the payment flow for this deal was. Normally, when you buy oil, you wait for it to be delivered, you check the quality, and then you pay. Simple, right? Well, not here. For this deal, IOC paid 95% of the total value the second the tanker entered Indian waters, before it even docked, before they offloaded a single drop. This is not normal. It was a super unusual setup that put almost all the financial risk squarely on India's shoulders. That's how desperate they were. And just as everyone in the market was trying to wrap their heads around this India, Iran, China deal, the US Treasury pulls another move. And this one, well, it really shows a kind of double standard in how they were applying their own sanctions. It's a real tale of two waivers. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. The U.S. Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, he comes out and says publicly that's it. The waivers for both Iran and Russia are done. They won't be renewed. And sure enough, just like he said, Iran's waiver, it expired on April 19th. End of story. But then, a few days later, the waiver for Russian oil, a different one called GL 1340B, gets quietly extended for another month. See what happened there? They created this targeted squeeze on Iran, but they let Russian oil keep flowing onto the market. A lot of people looked at that and said, that feels like a strategic choice, not just some technicality. So let's step back. What does this whole wild episode from April 2026 actually tell us? What's the bigger picture for energy and for money? Well, the takeaways here, they are absolutely huge. First off, you know all that talk about de-dollarization? This was it. This was it happening in the real world, not in some academic paper. You have a huge economy, India, using the currency of its biggest rival, China, to buy something as vital as oil, and doing it all completely outside the US dollar system. That's a big deal. Second, it was just a masterclass from India in what they call strategic autonomy, basically juggling their friendship with the US while doing what they absolutely had to do to keep the lights on. And the biggest irony of all, a US sanctions waiver is the very thing that ended up pushing India and Iran to build this brand new payment system using the Chinese yuan. Talk about unintended consequences. And it's not just us saying it. A former top sanctions advisor, Roxana Vigil, she pointed out that these kinds of emergency waivers can have really weird unintended side effects. Instead of just lowering prices, they can actually shift the power dynamic. Suddenly, the sanctioned countries like Iran and Russia can go from being price takers to price setters, which can actually leave global prices even higher than before. So that really leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? Was this whole thing just a one-off, a crazy move in a crazy crisis? Or did we just witness the first lines being drawn on a completely new map for global energy? A map where the US dollar is no longer the undisputed king? The answer to that question is going to define global finance for a long, long time.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more insights.